to that. And I'm definitely not wearing the same clothing as the first episode of our podcast, which we still don't have a name for.
Yeah.
Game Point Performance Podcast. I'm sure eventually we'll rebrand it. Maybe not hopefully not the company.
Yeah, we have a point. It's the name of our podcast.
I actually like that.
We have a point.
Yeah, Vo had a couple ideas, but I usually don't listen to him, so I don't remember what they were. Okay, welcome to the Game Point Performance Podcast. This is our second episode. I'm here with Goose Helton, our superstar athlete from Game Point Performance. And then I'm Chris Wicus, more of the brains, as you can see by the glasses and the headphones. It makes me a little more intellectual, I think. Scientific. Yeah, I probably will fix my glasses over the course of this interview, podcast, whatever thing that we're doing. But today, we're talking about the importance of high intensity as well as low intensity training with how we perform things. So, Goose, let's talk about your history as an athlete. I'm sure that since you trained yourself mostly, and I'm not going to tell your whole story, I promise. But I know that you didn't really have a lot of resources to draw from to begin with. So I'm sure a lot of your training was poor in terms of the decision to balance high and low intensity. So go ahead and talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I figured if I wanted to have high output, then I needed to just practice high output all the time. And so all my gym sessions and all of my conditioning would reflect that. I would, especially when we talk about conditioning, because I think commonly people, are going to give a relatively high intensity in the gym. With regard to conditioning, a lot of times it was always just like 150 shuttles or like goose cones, where it's lots of changes of direction for like 30 seconds and just do more and more and more of that. And those things are neurologically very taxing. And if you just do that day after day, trying to be the best, it may actually knock you down a few pegs.
Yeah. Sure. So yeah, you don't want to run the engine hot at all times. Otherwise the engine's going to explode. You're going to total your car, which is your body. And unlike a car, you only really get one of those, your body being the car in this analogy. Hopefully I'm not losing anyone as I'm talking about cars and people. But we're going to talk a little bit about high and low intensity training options so people have a little more context to what we're saying. So if we have this chart here from the late, great Charlie Francis. Can you see the chart?
It says running velocity and then has a red area, a yellow area, and then a blue area.
Nice. For our colorblind viewers, if your name is Tim Vo, for instance, this is red at the top. This is yellow, and this is blue. I don't actually know if you can see yellow or blue. I don't even know if you can see.
Some people may not be visually watching this podcast.
That's true. For those who are visually impaired to the point where they're listening to the audio version of this, just use your best imagination. There's two very striking gentlemen right now talking to you. I'm probably not using the most sensual of voices. Goose only has a sensual voice as his option. So as a default, he's just the guy you want to listen to for that. Anyways, so high intensity stimuli, high intensity training stuff, I'm talking about 95 to 100% of your maximum effort. So like Goose was saying, high intensity on the nervous system. This enhances your muscle fiber recruitment, requires complete recovery between reps, requires a long time to recover, and there's a lot of pressure and taxing on the circulatory system as well. Medium intensity work would be in between low and high intensity. We want to try to limit the amount of medium intensity work that's happening. We get a lot of medium intensity work from practicing and playing our sport because you have a sport like ultimate frisbee that's very what some might consider alactic aerobic. So we'd say alactic is any sort of energy requirement that is lasting under 10, 12 seconds. And then aerobic would be longer duration activities that are lasting longer than 1 minute up to hours. So you have a game like Ultimate Frisbee where you have very long bouts. You have points that can last from 1 minute or 35 seconds even for very successful offensive points. Hard-fought defensive points with multiple turnovers can be anywhere from 1 to 10 minutes. I'm sure there's been longer ones in the history of the sport, but when you're dealing with a sport like that has those requirements energetically or in terms of your body helping to reproduce energy, you're going to want to train at high intensities to allow for, like Goose was talking about earlier, high levels of output. And in this case, we're talking about force development to allow us to sprint fast and jump high. And then you want to have your aerobic capacities to a level that can help replenish your explosive energy stores for those longer duration periods of time. So again, we're using very explosive movements with intermittent breaks in between. So say you do 15 seconds of work, you rest and reset to a stack for 15 seconds, you do another 15 seconds of work, you rest again, and you do another 10 seconds of work, and that might be a point. So what we want to try to do is train both ends of that spectrum. So I need to be making sure that my outputs are still high on the intensity chart. So I'm always trying to push the limits of my speed and my explosive abilities. And I want to make sure that my low intensity days are there to allow for me to recover, because that's where the real progression and the real adaptation is going to happen, is when we recover, we rest, we allow for protein synthesis to happen, muscles to repair, brain to start to remodel and repattern. So we want to have this broken up with our training to allow for high intensity and low intensity so that we can get optimal training results.
This also just makes sense intuitively, right? Like when someone typically talks to me about what they want out of training for ultimate, they want to run faster, jump higher, and be more like durable or have better conditioning. And like it's easily broken into these red and blue zones. Like run faster or accelerate or top speed, it's a high intensity. Jump higher, high intensity. Last all day or last all tournament, that's the low intensity component.
Right. And where some people get it wrong is they think, okay, well, I want to be able to jump higher and I want to be able to be stronger and faster, so I'm just going to train that way.
Right.
And what the errors they're going to see there, they're either going to overload their system and end up with overuse injuries from always trying to redline themselves, or they're going to lose a significant amount of these lower intensity adaptations that are going to help keep their energy up. Because the real show when it comes to field and court athletes is what's called repeat sprintability.
Right.
So that's a type of endurance that I want to be able to put out, like I was saying, if the work and rest ratios of the sport require 10 to 15 seconds of work and then 10 to 15 seconds of rest over and over and over again, I need to have the abilities and the adaptations of we would call it your bioenergetic systems of your body to allow for me to refill my energy stores while I'm resting, while I'm taking those breaks in between my explosive bouts. And in order to do that, I have to be able to train both ends of the spectrum like we're talking about here.
That's right.
Okay, so how that would be broken down into a week. We have this chart here, which you can see we have high and low breakdowns. So this could change based on whatever needs you have during the week. But as you see, that it's usually the best way to do it is high intensity alternating with low intensity. And again, why is that important? So if I'm always trying to be doing high intensity, I'm not allowing for enough recovery time to get me to get back to the point where I can have high levels of output. So if I keep redlining myself, the actual amount of output that I'm able to utilize is going to drop off eventually. I mean, I'm sure there's always going to be a point of diminishing returns when it comes to that. So optimally speaking, I want to give myself time to cut it back and be more low intensity. So 75% and below for that sort of thing.
And those people who can't see the screen, it does actually show under the high intensity block here that it requires 48 hours of recovery. So, when we look at this weekly chart, that's easily covered here when we've got, let's say, a Monday, Wednesday, and Friday representing our high days, our high intensity days, and the days in between being our lower intensity days, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. So between Monday and Wednesday, you have that 48 hours of recovery time so you can push that threshold again.
Right. And you see that the breakdown for this chart showing high intensity being strength and power. So there needs to be an understanding from everyone that strength would be weight room activities, anything that's requiring load or oftentimes longer ground contact times on when it comes to putting force into the ground. And power is a large range, but it's important to realize you're talking about the rate at which we can use our strength. So how quickly we can express strength. So sprinting, jumping, all of these things are very high intensity activities, as we saw from the other chart. Those would be put into that position. Low intensity things are going to be on the more aerobic side. So you're going to have things that don't require maximum heart rates, would be below your anaerobic threshold, which we will talk about in the program, and we will also talk about on a different podcast. But that would include tempo runs for low intensity, GPP, which doesn't stand for game point performance here. It stands for general physical preparation. So these are all of your circuit type of training, body weight exercises, lunges, things that you're able to do in a more continuous fashion with little rest. And then accessory work, all of these things, the biggest points being that the lower intensity work is going to be below this threshold of 75%. So be that in relation to heart rate, be that in relation to absolute maximum for loads lifted, be that in relation to absolute speed. So if we're talking about 70%, so we'll define tempo runs here, and then I'll let Goose talk a little bit about his experience with that, because he's been utilizing that a lot in the last year or so. You have if you have an athlete that can run 100 meters in 10 seconds, then you're going to want to try to keep them below that threshold so that you're not redlining their engine at all times. So in order to do that, a low intensity day for that person, you can utilize what's called a tempo run or a tempo sprint, which would be 70%. That's a pretty good number to go for. So I would multiply that 10 seconds by 1.3 to give me 70%. And then I would end up with a 13-second 100-meter run. Now that is still pretty fast, relatively speaking, and it's still going to allow for a lot of those same type of high intensity activations of my nervous system and my muscles, but it's going to be low enough intensity to not overtax my nervous system. So those are like the biggest points of using low intensity techniques like tempo running. It's also going to provide you with some resilience for your hamstrings, because people pull their hamstrings running, and you can strengthen them in the weight room, but it's also very important in terms of getting the proper velocity and what you call the dynamic correspondence to actual sprinting, to go sprint. So that's kind of the joke that we make around here. How do you get better at throwing? You throw. How do I get better at sprinting? You sprint. So if you want to be resilient to sprinting and you want strong hamstrings, hamstring curls are great to help you with some tissue quality stuff and loading those tissues in a way that maybe won't be as threatening to your nervous system. But at the end of the day, you are going to need to sprint, and you're going to need to sprint pretty fast to recruit your hamstrings at high velocities and keep them strong. Goose, go ahead and talk about tempo running and how you've been using it.
So it kind of depends on which time of the year I'm in as to exactly how I'm implementing tempo runs, but my experience has been using them in I guess 3 different outlets. One of them would be like a 10-second sort of tempo run. I'd also do a 90-yard tempo run, 110-yard tempo run. But all of these are run at as precisely to 70% as I can make them. So I have to test my 100% speed for any of those options, whether it's for time, but let's just say 90 yards. I have to figure out exactly what that looks like for me. And then I do the calculation, take the time times 1.3, and it tells me at what pace I will be running at 90 or at 70%.
For the given distance.
Yeah, for that given distance of 90 yards. And the big things that I have to focus on to make sure I get the most out of it is running form. Like Chris was talking about, if the best way to get better at sprinting is to sprint, best way to get better at running is to run, that sort of thing. And if we want our hamstrings to be durable, then we might as well be putting ourselves through running patterns that we're going to need on the field, and sometimes balance it out at this lower intensity. So I want to run in a way that very much resembles what sprinting would look like. So I want to focus on driving my hands up. I want to focus on driving my knees up, having good vertical displacement of my hips, my head, so keeping my hips and head high relative to the ground. So I would complete a repetition, rest for roughly 60 seconds or walking back depending on the distance, and then go again. I generally want to keep my heart rate below 150. So we're staying in like a recovery oriented zone of my heart, of purely aerobic, as opposed to building up a lot of hydrogen ions or that concept of lactic acid over time.
Lactic acid.
Yeah.
You want to talk about lactic acid?
I don't really want to talk about lactic acid right now. We can talk about that. That could be a whole.
Let's talk about lactic acid, how it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Let me drop that information on you. So, kind of like a nitpicky thing. I won't get too into it, but you produce lactate as a fuel source. Actually, I don't really even know what it's being used for. Could be to help buffer hydrogen ions. But I'll tell you that right now that lactate and hydrogen, the bond between them dissociates very quickly. So you never actually have lactic acid buildup. You have a buildup of lactate and you have a buildup of hydrogen ions. And what you would call like an acidic state, acidosis. So if someone tells you that they're flushing lactic acid out of their muscles, be like, I don't think so. Like a guy on a podcast told me that you're wrong.
He was wearing glasses, so
he was at a computer with 2 monitors. He had headphones on. Clearly, this guy knows what he's talking about. Okay, let me try to pull up. This could be cut out, Vo, if you're watching. If not, like, people want to see the process.
Peek behind the curtain, as it were.
Come on down. Downloads. Full-size output. Let's do the
crayons.
So let me stop share. Crayons. Let's screen share this thing, huh?
All right.
So kind of let's talk a little bit about what a tempo run should look like. So Goose is talking about running mechanics. A lot of your hamstring tears and your overuse injuries are going to happen from improper running form. We won't be getting into that particularly today. We go into running mechanics at length with our program. So visit our website and you can subscribe to our list for that and join us and learn how to run properly. But we'll go through a brief synopsis here. I got Goose running. Like he's saying, to stand really tall. He's getting into these positions where he's getting knee lift and arm lift to keep him very high up. The more his hips drop and the more his leg ends up going too far in front and too far behind, the more at risk he is for some sort of hamstring issue. The slower he will be because he will actually be decelerating himself if his foot lands too far in front. And then the counter, equal and opposite reactions. We're going to talk about physics and thermodynamics and things like that. If I have to put my foot too far in front, then the equal and opposite reaction of that will have to be having my foot end up too far behind me on push off. And that ends up with me being on the ground for a longer period of time. And we know if I'm on the ground for too long a period of time during top speed, I'm slowing myself down. I want to be very elastic and springy to keep momentum going as I move forward. And again, like this conversation is about high and low intensity. So how can I use a low intensity version that's actually going to help me recover, but also train me in a way that's going to help apply to running, and something that we do a lot of on the field. And that, my friends, is by utilizing tempo runs with a form that's very much like this. It's just beautiful. Kind of looks like you're not wearing any pants at all.
I am free as a bird out there.
It's like I'm wearing nothing at all. Nothing at all. That if this is on YouTube and you post in the comments what that is from, I'll send you a t-shirt. Okay. So that's it. So I'd be like, it's like I'm wearing nothing at all. Nothing at all. Okay. Anyways.
Maybe like the first person who responds.
Yeah. Thank you for clarifying, because I'm not sending out multiple shirts. We're also, it's very presumptuous of us to think that more than one person is actually going to watch this. So that one viewer of this podcast, you can win a shirt. No, but seriously, if you know what that's from and you're the first person to comment, I will send you a shirt. Or a Goose will. I probably won't do it.
It'll come from somewhere.
Yeah, it will. It might look like the one that Goose is wearing.
It could be the shirt.
Or it might look like this.
Yeah.
Probably won't look like this, because this is limited edition. As in, the sizing is not right. Okay, high and low intensity. How much have we talked about this? Not enough.
Not enough.
Okay, so let's talk about medium intensity. Why is medium intensity bad? Why would medium intensity be bad? Student Goose.
It seems to me like you might be pulling the worst of all the worlds together. Like you're taxing your nervous system a decent bit, but you're also not giving your body an opportunity to recover.
Absolutely. So you're bombarding yourself with lots of mediocre work, and that will equate to being a very mediocre athlete.
Yeah, I can't imagine you can get high output from medium work.
Yeah, so there's the camp of people that are going to say, yeah, well, we just play the sport, and then that will train us to condition and to be fast and jump high. I have no problem with training your sport to get better at your sport. You have to do that. But you have to understand that if the majority of the work that you're doing in your sport is medium intensity, then if you have very high force outputs and you don't train at that high of a level to keep pushing those force outputs and that adaptation up and maintaining it, you will lose it. So you're a very good example of this, Goose. I remember you telling me probably a year ago that over the course of a season, over the course of a couple seasons, your vertical actually went down. And this is something that people very commonly see. And I think it's just because there isn't a very good understanding of how adaptation works in terms of explosiveness and power and force development, and how quickly those adaptations go away. So I think another common a myth that should be busted would be that we shouldn't run in the off season, or at least take weeks off of running. And I'm fine for unloading an athlete's legs to a certain extent, but I don't necessarily want you to take time off of being fast. So I'll elaborate a little bit on that. Even if we're just to run accelerations and I'm asking for the muscle to fire at a rate at which is close to full speed or maximum intensity for a given athletic output, I'm still going to be pushing those adaptations and at least maintaining them, which is important. And I really only have a window of about 3 to 6 days in order to keep those. So in the off season, yes, you don't want to be running at such a high volume as you might have been in season, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't be doing jumping work with controlled landings, box jumps like we would use that kind of take that landing component out, or even doing some softer starting and acceleration variations that we use in the early off season with a lot of our athletes.
Yeah, so, certain athletic qualities only have a lasting
shelf life, half-life, whatever you want to call it. Yeah.
And when we're talking about speed, we're saying maybe 5 days plus or minus 3 days or something.
Yeah. So even in season, people, like we were saying, we're just going to play the sport. We're going to lift weights in the gym. We're going to play the sport. that is all fine and good, but you are not going to be experiencing the velocities in high enough of a volume, those high velocities in high enough of a volume in the weight room or doing a bunch of medium intensity work in a game. You might have, so in a tournament, you might run full speed a handful of times. And that's great. But if you don't run full speed again until, a week from that point, when you could be running full speed again 3 or 4 days afterwards, the possibility for you losing speed is very high, especially if you don't play. If you don't play a lot and you're sitting on the bench and you might get 2 or 3 really high intensity efforts in a tournament, that's not going to be enough to keep driving those adaptations up. So that's why this high and low intensity concept is so important. I want to be able to get out there, run max velocity in acceleration and top end speed, and jump as high as I can and as fast as I can. Now, it doesn't have to be in crazy high volumes in season, but just enough. A question of what is enough, but that's kind of why we're here to help answer those questions of dosage for these type of things. But that's something that people need to understand when it comes to where's the place for this high intensity stuff, and how come playing the sport isn't sufficient?
Yeah, I mean, the best way to get better at Ultimate is play Ultimate. But if the argument can be made, and I think it certainly could be, that most of the reps that you get in Ultimate are at a medium level of intensity, then we're not meeting our requirements for our high intensities, and we may get a little bit of our low, but we're not going to get the output that we're looking for simply by playing.
Right. And then there's going to be people watching this that are saying, well, I'm running hard the whole time. I play 8 points a game and I run my butt off the entire time. But if you're being dragged through a point that's 2 minutes long, you have to remember that your outputs are going to deplete over the course of that 2 minutes. So at the end of that 2 minutes, you might be running what you perceive as a maximal intensity sprint, but the velocities aren't going to match up. So if you can run 17 miles an hour, but your what for you feels like high intensity at the end of your 2 minute point is 13 miles an hour, that might not be enough to keep you pushing the limits of that high intensity, which you really need to be pushing 90%. So if I can run 17 miles an hour for 5 seconds, I need to be hitting at least 15 and a half, 16 miles an hour pretty consistently. So every week, in order to keep those adaptations. Otherwise, I will slowly start to lose speed, and I will slowly start to lose the ability to jump. And I'll adapt myself to being a very medium level athlete. And that's not what we want. We want to dose high intensities, give low intensity periods to recover and adapt, and then hit the high intensities again. But this is a very complicated landscape to try to navigate by yourself. That's why we're here for you people.
The nice thing is a lot of the work that we need to do within our energy systems development is low intensity because it's recovery oriented, right? Like we're trying to recover from our high intensity bouts, but we're also trying to make our aerobic system, our bioenergetics, more conducive for recovery during bouts of play, right? Like while we're on the sideline or while we're hands on knees on the field, we've got to rapidly restore, our ATP or, whatever. We just need to be
glycogen.
Yeah, sure. We need to feel prepared to be able to make the play again, right? We got to be able to have that
heart rate needs to drop, that level of threat needs to subside a little bit, those energy stores need to be replenished, all of that stuff. Yeah. And it's like how you can't adapt a human organism to be able to do that by always doing high intensity work. Yeah, that's the too long didn't read version of that.
Right.
Can't go hard all the time. Movies like Rocky and all of these like training montage movies in the 80s have certainly not helped us in this front, because everyone's like, oh, well, Rocky just broke himself constantly. Yeah.
People also don't get punched in the face for an entire boxing bout and make it.
Yeah. People that play Frisbee don't get punched in the face for 3 minutes at a time over and over again. I don't know, unless you're like really in there. Unless you're like You're a defender. Your name is Bob Lou, and you're a defender, and you're at elbow height. You're gonna get hit. I shouldn't say that. Bob has never played defense a day in his life. Shout out 808.
Sick burn.
What was that? Did somebody hear that in the background?
No, unfortunately, there's someone with a loudspeaker with children a block away or something like that. It's weird. It's like it's a nice day here in San Diego, so people are outside.
Hey man, it's 80 here.
I don't know what they're doing out there.
It's gross though. It's like 80 and like 90. It feels like Florida.
Yeah, it's gross here too.
Like Florida, right, Tim?
I can't see any clouds, and it's 70. Ugh.
It's not good.
Yeah.
So yeah, high intensity, low intensity. You got questions, I'm sure. Post them in the comments. We'll have someone read through them. Maybe I'll get back to you. Maybe we'll get back to you.
I mean, this is definitely going to be a point of conversation within our Facebook group. There's no doubt.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
People are either going to be used to just going hard all the time, or they're going to come in with no knowledge of how to balance these things.
Yeah, and it's like you're the perfect example. Some things for you are low intensity that aren't low intensity for other people.
Yeah.
Like you can run these we call like an aerobic interval in our program. Goose is running 2 minutes hard and then 2 minutes like medium pace. But if anyone were to just jump in that workout with him, they would be redlining their engine because they're not as adapted as Goose is to running in this way. So it's also important to know, like, how do I measure what my thresholds should be? Like, what sort of speed should I be moving at? And we can hopefully help you answer all those questions.
Yeah. This is also one of the reasons why we, admonish our members to have heart rate monitors. It's a good proxy for the level of energy that they're having to expend and maintain, sustain.
Right.
Because
how well they're recovering.
Yeah. If somebody were to your example, if somebody were to run this 2 minute bout with me, and we were to run at the same speed, the chances of their heart rate being in a different range than mine is very high.
Yes.
I could be topping out at like 160, 165, and another person who's a little less adapted would, be like 175, 180. They could really just be dying quickly.
Right. And just for reference, if when Goose is talking about 165, for him, 160 is going to be below that 75% mark.
Yeah.
And then so someone else is, say, the same age, like old as dust, like Goose is, and they're pushing 180, they're more in this zone. So the same exact exercise that you would seem to think, like this is one of the pitfalls of trying to take a program that's cookie cutter and give it to everyone, because if you literally were trying to do the same workout that Goose is doing at any given moment in time, it could be a high intensity version of what he's doing for low intensity.
Right.
And it's not like the body's going to adapt regardless. If you're pushing the red line and you're always pushing that high intensity, you're much more likely to break down, and it's going to take you much longer to recover. So you have to figure out, like, how is the best way to dose the stress in order to get the proper adaptation at the right time of the season. It's a very tough thing to try to do on your own.
And to be fair, it's our tagline, right? It's train, recover, repeat. Like that's the name of the game. Whether we're talking about lifting weights, and our classic example there is, weightlifting does not build muscle. Recovery builds muscle, right? Like that's that time in between sessions that actually builds the muscle. Your weightlifting just tears it down. You work really hard on your sprinting mechanics, your CNS, your central nervous system. It's gonna be taxed. It's going to be worn down. Your 100% speed output is going to go down after you've done several reps of it, and you have to spend some time recovering in order to move forward.
Yeah, brain's like a battery. Yeah, you gotta refill that battery, and that happens when you sleep. So, like, imagine a Tesla car getting plugged into an outlet. You gotta do that. You gotta rebalance electrons, man.
Yeah.
You gotta go hug a tree and get in the ocean.
Man.
I
do love them in the ocean.
Yeah, roll around in the sand. Eat some dirt. Probably not eat some dirt.
Yeah, no dirt eating.
Yeah.
You did not hear us.
Send us a video to Game Point Performance of you eating dirt. And
You did not hear us say eat dirt.
Someone's gonna do it. I won't give you a shirt. All right. I think that's good.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. We said some things that are gonna be provocative, really get the people going.
They don't know what it means, but
nobody knows what it means. It's provocative. All right, great. GamePointPerformance.com/join.
Yeah. See you next time.
Bye.